The road stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of faded asphalt cutting through the Alabama countryside. It had been a long drive, too long. My wife, Elena, sat beside me, her dark eyes scanning the map on her phone, while Sophia, our 6-year-old daughter, dozed in the back seat, her tiny hands clutching a stuffed rabbit. We had been on the road for hours, stopping only for gas, and my stomach had been grumbling for the last 50 miles. So when we saw the small diner off the highway, its neon sign flickering, Maggie's Home Cooking, I took the exit without a second thought. It looked like the kind of place where the coffee was strong, the biscuits were warm, and the portions were big enough to make the stop worthwhile. Inside, the place smelled of fried chicken, bacon grease, and something sweet, maybe peach cobbler. A handful of customers sat at the counter, their eyes flicking toward us as we walked in. A trucker in a faded denim jacket sipped his coffee, an elderly couple shared a plate of grits, and in the far corner, a man in a worn-out army jacket stirred a spoon through a bowl of chili. We took a booth near the window, the vinyl seat sticking slightly to my arms in the humid air. Sophia, rubbing the sleep from her eyes, perked up at the sight of the dessert case near the register. "Daddy, can I have pie?" she asked, her voice full of hope. "Let's eat first, mi amor," I said, ruffling her dark curls. A waitress, maybe in her 60s, moved between tables, her graying hair pinned up in a loose bun. She wore a pale blue uniform, her apron tied neatly around her waist. I caught her eye and gave a polite nod, but she turned away before I could speak. Instead, she walked straight to another table, refilling a man's coffee with a smile. I waited. Maybe she hadn't seen us. A few minutes passed, then 10. Elena shifted uncomfortably. "Should we just go?" she whispered. I looked around. The waitress was moving, working, serving, just not us. She went from table to table, pouring drinks, taking orders, laughing with the regulars. She passed our booth again, this time carrying a plate of pancakes to a man who had walked in well after us. I cleared my throat and raised a hand slightly, but she didn't even glance our way. Sophia tugged on my sleeve. "Daddy, why aren't we getting food?" I exhaled slowly, glancing at Elena, who looked at me with the same quiet understanding. We had both seen this before, different places, different faces, but always the same unspoken message. I leaned toward Sophia and forced a small smile. "I think the waitress is just busy, sweetheart." But we all knew that wasn't true. Minutes stretched on, thick and heavy like the summer heat outside. My stomach churned, not from hunger anymore, but from something colder, something heavier. Elena's fingers drummed lightly against the table, her nails tapping a steady, anxious rhythm. Sophia, still too young to grasp the full weight of what was happening, swung her legs under the table, humming to herself. But even she sensed something was wrong. "Daddy, I'm really hungry," she said, her voice softer this time. I looked around the diner again. The waitress, her name tag read Linda, was still working, still moving, still serving. But not us. Never us. A man at the counter stirred his coffee, his eyes flicking toward me, then away. A woman near the door wiped her hands on a napkin, her gaze lingering for just a second too long before she returned to her plate. The air in the diner had shifted, like everyone knew, but no one would say it out loud. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the frustration rising in my chest. This wasn't new. I had dealt with it before. Sometimes subtle, sometimes not. A lingering look, a dismissive tone, a door held open for someone else, but not for me. It was the unspoken thing, the thing that no one had to say out loud, but was always there, woven into certain places, certain people. Elena touched my hand under the table. "We should go," she murmured. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to walk out, to take my family and leave this place behind like a bad memory. But another part of me, the part that had worked too many hours, driven too many miles, and watched my daughter's eyes light up at the thought of pie, wanted to stay, wanted to make them see us, acknowledge us, serve us. I pushed back from the table just enough to get the waitress's attention, lifting a hand again. "Excuse me, ma'am." My voice was calm, steady. She turned her head slightly, barely looking at me, then moved past our table like I wasn't even there. Something inside me tightened. Across the room, silverware clinked against plates. Conversations murmured on, but no one said anything. No one called her out. No one asked why the family sitting by the window, the only brown faces in the room, hadn't been served. I swallowed down the bitter taste in my mouth and reached for my wallet. "Let's go," I said, my voice quieter this time. Sophia's face fell, but we didn't eat. Elena gathered her purse, her expression unreadable, but I knew what she was feeling. The same thing I felt. I slid out of the booth, my movement slow, measured. As I stood, a voice, low, steady and firm, cut through the quiet. "If you won't serve them, then I'm not paying for my meal either." The room went still. Silence filled the diner, thick as the scent of grease and coffee. Conversations had stopped. Forks hovered midair. Even Linda, the waitress, froze, her hand gripping the handle of a coffee pot. The man who had spoken was pushing himself up from his seat at the counter. He was older, maybe late 60s, with broad shoulders and a frame that suggested he'd been strong once. Still was, in a way. His graying hair peeked out from under a faded army cap, and his worn jacket, decorated with a few patches, hung loosely on his frame. The lines on his face were deep, carved by time, but his blue eyes were sharp as they settled on Linda. "You heard me," he said, his voice calm but unshakable. "If they're not getting served, then I'm not paying." A murmur ran through the diner. A few heads turned our way, really looking at us for the first time. Others kept their eyes down, staring into their plates like they wished they were anywhere but here. Linda's mouth pressed into a tight line. "This ain't got nothing to do with you, Jim." Jim, that was his name. Jim leaned one elbow on the counter, unfazed. "I think it does." He shifted his gaze to me, giving a slight nod. Man comes in with his family, sits down like anyone else, and somehow they get skipped over? That don't sit right with me. The diner felt smaller now, the air heavier. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't used to this. Someone standing up for me. Usually, when these moments happen, I was the one swallowing my frustration, the one deciding whether to walk away or push back. But now, a man I had never met was putting his meal, his money, his comfort on the line. Linda crossed her arms. "You don't like it, Jim, you can leave." "That's so." His voice was still level, but there was something behind it now. Something that made the silence in the diner stretch even longer. "Then I guess I ain't the only one leaving that." He turned, locking eyes with the trucker in the denim jacket. "How about you, Mike?" The trucker hesitated, then exhaled sharply, tossing his napkin onto his half-eaten plate. "Damn it, Jim," he muttered, pushing back his stool. "Yeah, all right. I'm with you." One by one, more voices joined in. "Yeah, this don't feel right. I'm not paying either. You either serve them or we all walk." Linda's face darkened. She turned toward the kitchen, her frustration boiling over. "Dale," she barked. "Get out here." A moment later, a heavy-set man in a grease-stained apron emerged from the back. His eyes flicked from Linda to Jim to us, taking in the situation like a man who already knew he had a problem on his hands. "What's going on?" Dale asked, rubbing a hand over his balding head. Linda pointed at me, at Elena, at Sophia. "They're causing trouble." Jim let out a short, humorless laugh. "They ain't said a damn word." He crossed his arms. "It's you that's causing trouble, Linda." Dale sighed. He looked around the diner, seeing the way people had put down their forks, the way they were waiting for him to say something. His jaw tightened. "You serve everyone who walks through that door," he said finally, his voice firm. Then, after a beat, "And if you can't do that, you don't work here no more." Linda's face turned red. "You're firing me?" Dale didn't waver. "I am." A beat of silence. Then Linda let out a scoff, ripped off her apron, and stormed toward the door. She didn't look at me as she passed, didn't look at Elena or Sophia. She just yanked the door open, stepped outside, and let it slam shut behind her. Dale exhaled, then turned to us. "Y'all ready to order?" For a moment, I didn't move. Neither did Elena. Even Sophia sat still, her wide eyes darting between me and the door Linda had just stormed through. The air in the diner hadn't quite settled yet. There was still a charge to it, like the last rumble of thunder after storm. Dale, the owner, stood there, arms folded over his chest, waiting for an answer. I could tell he wasn't a man used to making speeches, and firing Linda had probably been more trouble than he wanted, but he had done it, and now he was looking at me like he needed to know what came next. I cleared my throat. "Yeah," I said finally. "We're ready to order." A slow murmur ran through the diner as people turned back to their plates, to their conversations, to whatever life had looked like before all this. But it wasn't quite the same. It couldn't be. Dale nodded once and reached into his apron for a notepad. "What can I get ya?" Elena ordered first, scrambled eggs, bacon, toast. I got coffee, eggs, and biscuits with gravy. And Sophia, still shaken but never one to forget what she wanted, looked Dale right in the eye and said, "Can I have pie?" That made him chuckle. "Pie for breakfast, huh?" She nodded, her little hands folded in front of her. Dale scratched something onto his notepad. "All right, kiddo, 1 slice of pie. And don't worry about the bill. That one's on the house." Jim was still standing by the counter, arms crossed over his chest, watching like he wanted to make sure this all went the way it should. His plate of chili sat untouched. I met his eyes. "Thank you," I said, my voice low but steady. Jim shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. "Ain't right what she did." He sat back down and picked up his spoon, but before taking a bite, he added, "Some folks forget what this country's supposed to be about." I didn't respond, but I thought about that as Dale disappeared into the kitchen. A few minutes later, a different waitress, a younger woman with a ponytail and tired eyes, came to our table, setting down 3 steaming plates. The smell of butter and gravy wrapped around me like something I hadn't realized I needed. Sophia got her pie, a big slice of apple with a scoop of vanilla melting on the side. She grinned at it, but before taking a bite, she looked up at me, serious now. "Daddy, why was that lady mean to us?" I set my fork down. Elena glanced at me, but didn't speak. This one was mine to answer. I looked into my daughter's eyes. So young, so full of questions she shouldn't have to ask yet. "Some people see the world a certain way," I said slowly. "And when they see something different, something they don't understand, they don't know how to act right." Sophia frowned, but we didn't do anything. "I know, Mija." She considered that, then picked up her fork and dug into her pie. I exhaled, letting the moment settle. Across the diner, Jim took a bite of his chili and gave me a small nod, like he understood exactly what I meant. Maybe better than I did. The first bite of food tasted different, like something hard-earned. The biscuits were soft, the gravy rich, but I barely noticed. My mind was still caught in the weight of everything that had just happened. Elena ate in small bites, her eyes flicking Sophia every so often, checking to see if she was okay. Our daughter, now content with her pie, swung her legs beneath the booth again, humming like she had before the waiting, before the silence, before Linda. It amazed me how easily kids could move past things, how quickly they could find comfort in something as simple as a slice of pie. But for me, for Elena, the wait lingered. Across the diner, Jim ate his chili like nothing had happened. But I knew better. He had been the first to speak up. He had made the others follow. Without him, Linda would still be here, pretending we didn't exist. I glanced at Elena, then back at Jim. "Excuse me," I said. Jim looked up. I hesitated, then slid out of the booth, walking toward the counter. I wasn't sure what I was going to say, only that I needed to say something. Jim watched me approach, setting down his spoon. "Food, all right." I nodded. "It is..." I swallowed, glancing at his jacket. The patches worn but still clear. "You served?" Jim nodded. "Vietnam, 68 to 71. I let out a slow breath. "My uncle served. Same war." Jim studied me for a moment, then gestured to the seat beside him. "Sit." I did. For a moment, we both just sat there, 2 men in a small-town diner, the space between us filled with everything that had just happened. "Why'd you do it?" I finally asked. Jim scoffed, shaking his head. "Boy, I grew up in this town. Knew folks like Linda my whole damn life. People who think if you don't look like talk like, Then you don't belong. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. I fought in a war that was supposed to be about freedom. Came home and saw people like Linda pick and choose who that freedom applied to. His eyes darkened. Didn't sit right then. Don't sit right now. I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to. Jim shifted, turning his coffee cup in his hands. I ain't some hero. I just said what needed saying. A lot of people wouldn't have. He met my gaze, then gave a slow nod. Yeah, he admitted, a lot wouldn't. Jim took a slow sip of his coffee, his fingers wrapped around the ceramic cup, like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. Outside, the morning sun had climbed higher, spilling pale light through the diner windows. The place had settled back into its routine, plates clinking, quiet conversations humming. But something had shifted, a new rhythm, an awareness that hadn't been there before. I sat beside Jim at the counter, letting his words settle. He had said he wasn't a hero, that he had only done what was right. But I knew better. I had met plenty of men like him, men who had seen too much, carried too much, but still chose to do the right thing when it counted. I exhaled, resting my hands on my knees. Well, I appreciate it. Jim nodded. No need to. No, I said, meet his eyes. There is. A beat passed between us, quiet but full. Then, from behind me, a small voice spoke up. Thank you, mister. I turned to see Sophia standing by my side, her hands folded in front of her. She had finished her pie. The plate looked clean, but she wasn't thinking about food anymore. She was looking at Jim with the kind of honesty only a child could have. Jim studied her, something softening in his expression. You're welcome, sweetheart. She smiled, then turned to me, tugging on my sleeve. Can we go now, Daddy? I nodded. Yeah, Mija. Let's go. I stood, glancing back at Jim one last time. He gave me a small nod, and I returned it, knowing we understood each other in a way words couldn't quite capture. I walked back to our booth, where Elena was already gathering her purse. We didn't need to say much. Everything had been said in the way she squeezed my hand before we left the tip, the way she brushed a loose curl from Sophia's forehead. As we stepped outside, the heat hit us, thick and heavy. The sky stretched wide over the road ahead, the pavement shimmering in the sun. Elena slipped her hand into mine. You okay? I looked down at Sophia, who had already moved on, humming to herself again as she climbed into the car. I exhaled. Yeah. And for the first time in a long time, I almost believed it. I glanced once more at the diner, at the neon sign still flickering, Maggie's Home Cooking, at the man sitting inside who had proven that sometimes the right people show up in the places you least expect. Then I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled back onto the road, heading toward whatever came next. If this story resonated with you, share it with those who need to hear it. Let's start conversations that matter, and that will lead to change. Subscribe to our channel for more stories like this that challenge us, inspire us, and remind us of what we are capable of when we stand up for what is right.